Hey, it's Evan Bear from the Bunkie Company, and I am inside a bunkie here in Prince Edward County on a fine Saturday with my new friend Jeff Wheeldon, who we've just recently become acquainted with, who I was really excited to bring here and talk a little bit about housing and tiny homes and community. We had a really great chat, and what this little exercise is about is talking to different people and with different respects to how they relate to our business, being somewhat of a tiny home. So I thought, no, what a better place to do it and have a few drinks at the same time and enjoy the day. So Jeff, maybe tell us a little bit about yourself. Like, who are you? What do you do? And we'll move on to the next.
Sure, thank you. So my name is Jeff Wheeldon. I have been involved in politics for a number of years, really focused on sustainability and in recent years, affordability. I was on Green Party Shadow Cabinet for about 5 years, and I've run at federal, provincial, and municipal levels, currently sitting on council in Brighton, Ontario. But my day job is as a realtor. And I became a realtor in 2018. And so I was really just getting my feet wet when everything changed in 2020. And we really saw a massive surge in the commodification of housing.
Yeah.
And that really changed affordability for regular folks. It really changed the amount of real estate investment that was going on, that really took home ownership out of the hands of regular folks and put a lot of it into corporate hands, or a lot of investment strategies that really made housing more unaffordable for everyone. And since then, I've been watching the policy landscape for the last 4 or 5 years, looking at how is everybody trying to solve this problem of affordability. And so I've been watching policies at federal, provincial level, and then at the municipal level, where I actually have some influence. I'm trying to organize, how can we develop policy? How can we streamline zoning processes? How can we get more land? Things like that. So working on that problem, because I honestly, at the height of the pandemic especially, but ever since then, my day job doesn't feel really good to me, Yeah. Watching people who cannot find a place to live, cannot afford a place to live. I really believe that housing is a human right. And so trying to find a way of balancing that out and making real estate into something that can feel really good again is really my goal there. During that time, I've also served on the board of the local emergency shelter. And so I've been trying to work with the issue of homelessness as that's been exploding. And the opioid crisis, of course, overlapping with that, and the political fallout of that. It's been a really hot issue in Northumberland County lately. And so I managed to get together with some councilors from other municipalities in Northumberland, and we formed the Northumberland Intermunicipal Task Force on Housing and Homelessness. And so we've been meeting monthly for coming up on a year already. And I feel like that's been successful in helping make sure that people who are on council in Northumberland really understand what the actual problems are.
Right.
And our next step is to bring together developers, builders, lenders, realtors, planners, building officials, and politicians in a housing summit, so that we can get everybody sitting around the table and say, okay, let's go through the entire process from vacant land to keys in hand to find out where are the extra costs coming in? Where are the extra timeline coming in? How can we make this faster, cheaper, more affordable and accessible for everyone? And then with my green bias coming in, more sustainable as well. And so I'm looking at every stage of that, whether it's the way that we have ownership models or the way that we build things. You know, there are a lot of different ways to build a house, but we tend to only do it in the traditional way. And there are a lot of advantages to changing that up, but change is hard. So which parts of this process do we need to change? And is it possible to change a bunch of them at once? I want to find out. So that's who I am and where I'm coming from.
Nice. That's a killer intro. That's a lot. And that's why we had so much to talk about, because there are a lot of the things that I'm thinking about, and some of the reasons why I started to push the boundaries of this building style to a house-like scale. This is definitely not a home, but it can certainly house you, and it can keep you warm, and it can serve many functions. And that's another big part of it, is adding as much value as we can. It was really wild getting into that conversation because we had some visitors, and you were one of them, come and do a tour from Northumberland County and a few other local councilors and whatnot. And I think maybe what got that whole ball rolling was the first wave, and thinking, oh wow, you can actually build something like this in 2,500 square foot shop, or you can keep it relatively simple, and you can derive something that's seemingly complex, but pre-engineering a lot of the hard thinking into it so that makes it easier for somebody who has less skill to build it. Not that we don't want to create skilled people. So these were a lot of the really interesting conversations that we had. And when you started talking about all the different ways that you're involved with housing, it really started to help me understand how big the problem is. And I'm a product guy, I'm a creative thinker, tinkerer, entrepreneur, and I can think of a lot of really great ways, and I don't mind thinking inside or outside the box. I like constraints. I think that's a big part of sustainability, though, as a word and as a finite resource sort of or line of thinking. And I think that it was just along those lines that we kind of hit it off and started chatting about different ways that we could build things in a unique way. And I'd love to be able to move what we're doing here into a different realm. And I know that there's what's going on with homelessness and how we can create even temporary shelters for people and deploy them in a rapid sense. Yeah, there was so much that we talked about. And we'll definitely get into some more of that stuff. So specifically, because it's a passion thing from you, because people don't do all those things unless they actually give a what. And I sense that. And I could say the same thing for me. This is a hard thing to do at a relatively small scale, but I think building meaningful things for people is one of the good ways as a creator. That's not just putting stuff out into the world for the sake of making a living or to make stuff. It's to create something that's useful and that could be repaired or redone. But where did your passion for the housing sector or figuring out a way to deal with homelessness and get involved in all these different organizations and groups, where did that come from? Was there a catalyst at one point? I know you were in real estate, but was there any one way that you became passionate about this?
Well, I think back to college. When I was in college, I was in Lower Mainland, BC, and twice a week I was volunteering on East Hastings Street, which is the poorest area code in Canada. Very intense homelessness issues there, a lot of opioid addiction issues there and things like that. And so that was a really eye-opening experience for me. But I was 19, 20 years old, and that changed my perspective on life. And here I am 40 now, and I sometimes forget that other people haven't had that experience. Right. And so when I look around at the rise of incidences of homelessness and the political backlash that it's creating, sometimes I have to check myself and be like, oh, a lot of the people that are the most upset about this and causing the most political furor about this, their experience of this has only been somebody on the fringes looking in. They don't know the name of a homeless person, right, or they don't know where that person's story. They haven't been through the process of thinking about how I'm one missed paycheck away from being there myself. So I am trying to use that to ground myself. Mm-hmm. But really that experience in 2020, I hadn't set out to become a realtor in the first place, but it was potentially a promising and lucrative career, and I was interested in housing. But almost as soon as I became competent as a realtor, just getting my feet under me, it was immediately apparent that there are massive systems problems. And I am a systems-oriented person. Systems shape every aspect of our lives. And as a designer, you're a systems-oriented person as well. And you're looking for creative solutions to systemic problems, whether it's in the design of your product or in the design of our society. Right. And so a lot of those same principles apply. And so when I see a systemic problem, I'm just geared toward looking for solutions to it. And that combined with my experience of watching my clients, make 30 different offers on housing and not win a single one of them and end up having to rent an apartment that they really couldn't afford, but because they couldn't afford to buy anything at all, and giving up on the dream of home ownership. And then my experience working directly with people who are experiencing homelessness and knowing that it's not their fault. We can't just say, they should get a job, or, they shouldn't have done drugs or something like that. The complexities of homelessness are absolutely massive, and there's no way we can just brush them under the rug. But at the same time, it's astonishingly simple. When housing is unaffordable, people can't afford housing. Right. So wanting to address that systemic issue and wanting to be a net benefit to society in an industry that has been completely commodified to the point where it doesn't fulfill its function, is very viscerally upsetting to me. Yeah. And I'm surprised that it's not for more people. I know, every realtor that I've ever talked to knows that this is a problem and is doing little things in the ways that they can. Mm-hmm. I just also happen to be an elected official, and so I have a bit more pull on some of these things, and my policy orientation gives me more levers to pull on.
Right. Yeah. So if you, you could look, I from a creative visual guy, when I ask things about passion, immediately my thought process can go like, well, what things are you doing? But it's this process. It's what you lived through. It was what you were exposed. You were affected personally by an experience, and then that passion rolls out in a different way, as opposed to somebody's passionate about cool things, or the aesthetic. Yours was more of like a systemic issue with a process, and that the way your mind deals with that is through thinking through problems. And one of the things I've been learning, and I feel, and I think where our conversation really took off when we chatted last time, was around some of my thoughts about how I could scale this thinking up to a different level. And one of my concerns, just being a product thinker, is I know nothing about the political sphere at all. And so I'm thinking, well, geez, like, they're talking about all these problems. Why can't they figure out how to do this? Like, I know I could do that. Look what I'm doing in 24. Sure, it's not the solution for everybody, but an industrial designers skill set is really breaking things down into their basic elements, and then understanding what each one of them represents. It's a materials and process. I mean, there were industrial designers that focused on aesthetic, napkin sketch, blue sky, visual surfacing, to get excitement and to drive innovation. But then, there's a lot of the designers who or mechanical designers, and that have to work out all those details. So it's a unique thing to kind of understand beauty, be able to manipulate form, but also understand the nuts and bolts of it. And that was part of my journey through calling myself, I would always say, a sustainably minded designer, because I never wanted to use the word full sustainable, because that's not even a thing. It's not. Yeah. But you would want to do your best to do it. Like, you could have something that could be taken apart easily, or repaired, or using the right materials. Always some extra value add through a process to do it. So when we started talking, I'm thinking, man, what I've started to dig into here is, proving that this initial concept works, as opposed to going the full, VC route and getting all the money and saying how great things are. Here's my cool product, let's take it to a massive level. It was more like bootstrap. We kind of built it, but I figured out this thing in a very holistic way. And when we were talking, it was like, wow, like, I really think there's something I could do here to scale it. But it's a matter of finding the right project, right? It's a matter of finding a group of people who could rally behind it, or could understand it, or could leverage my skill set and work as a team. So the community building side of things, I think, was super interesting, and a missing piece of what a lot of designers who sit at desks who create things don't do. And that's one of the cool things about being an entrepreneur, is going out and meeting people. And that's why, I do design products for companies and I license them. I haven't done it as much in the last little while because I've been focused on Bunkie, but that's one of the great things about designers who are able to be innovative, because they move around. Like, they're meeting people like you, they're seeing what happens in communities, or they're going to shows, or they're traveling, or they're physically building something. How hard this product is that you just made. Okay, and that's why it's not successful, but it's better now because you've tried it, and you don't want to have to suffer what somebody else might have to suffer through. So it was through that sort of chain of dialogue that we got to talking, because there are some things that I would like to do with this building envelope and in a way to scale it, because what we've created so far is something that is made for high volume, but it's being made in a one-off sense, right? But it allows me certain control over the components and how I can wield. It's almost like it sounds so silly, but like a superpower of sorts, like being able to understand 3D space and to know what this is all going to look like when we're sitting in it, but on a computer, is a neat process to learn over the course of 10 years. So I'm like, I went from furniture to this scale, and I'm like, wow, I absolutely think we can move from this scale to ADU size, like nanny flat, like 200 to 400 square foot, which we got to talking a little bit about, or, you know, even getting into single family detached homes, like 1,000 square feet, 1,200 square feet, put in a basement. There's another 1,000 square feet. And then look at the furniture as well, like the way that the CNC works and the way that the thinking here is that they're all coming from the same place. Like you could have a shop that builds the furniture, builds the house. You could have these little pods everywhere. So we got to talking about all those types of things. And that's where we ran off the rails, right? Like it was so cool to just keep going on and on about that. That's a bit of my passion about, you know, I love building these things, these bunkies, and I love meeting the people, because they're unique people that buy them, that, because I don't really broadcast this on any major level. We do our thing, feel like we have integrity. We're very specific about, I say we because there's a team of people that build us, about the details and about the materials and everything. And this is part of my passion. And I think what's really cool, I feel like we'll have more conversations, absolutely, is about taking this to a higher level and helping to solve some of the housing problems, because there are some wild initiatives that are being put out by the government. So there's always this sort of double-edged sword of, it's like, oh, the government is like, there's a lot going on there, too much. And then, then there's the guys like you that are in that are doing the right thing and are thinking in the right direction. And, there's money being put out there by the federal government and provincial government to try to solve these problems. So there is work. It's not all one-sided, I feel. And that's one of the things that I really was great about having that meeting, and even having all those people come and visit a couple of weeks ago that were from the council, that were from the municipal office. It's like there are people out there who want to do well. So that fuels my next sort of range of development, I think, and getting into some actual solutions beyond cool bunkies for backyards, but like, can we actually make a dent in some way, shape, or form on affordable housing? And I think we can, for sure. And that's some of the stuff we talked about. So, I'm really curious, like, where do you see some of the opportunities to change the way that we build and or build communities?
Thank you. That's a huge question we could go all day on. But I really, at this point, I'm looking at how do we get all hands on deck, which means that we don't need a solution. We need about 10,000 solutions, most of which will only work in specific places, in specific contexts, or things like that. But, some people would put a lot of emphasis on densifying, but when they say densifying, they mean going from single-family detached dwellings to semi-detached or townhouses, which is still the high end of low density. Right. So when you want to talk about densifying, Brighton is a small town. We're an agricultural community, and I'd love to see a few new apartment buildings in town, and not 2-story 6-plex or 8-plex. I'm thinking, 5 or 6-story, 120 units. Right. Because there's that much demand and need in our community alone, and the growth that we're seeing expected over the next 10 years, yes, we absolutely have demand, not just for that many units, but for that type of unit, because the number of purpose-built rentals is very small. Right. And so we need some purpose-built rentals. But then as a realtor, I also want to talk about ownership model. We tend to assume that you're either going to have a freehold home that you own, or you're going to be in a condo corporation. Okay. But historically, when the federal government was producing a lot of public housing, there was also a lot more cooperative housing. And co-ops are an amazing thing because they're nonprofit. They can really stabilize the rent of an entire neighborhood when you put one co-op in there, because they're not always seeking the maximum possible rent. Okay. They set their rent at a rate that is going to maintain the nonprofit corporation that runs it. Okay. And so they're almost always going to be cheaper than any market rent around them. And so if market rent places are competing with that co-op model, then they have to keep their prices lower too.
Right.
And that's in a future where we actually have more than enough housing. And so that's the challenge. We need a lot more units. And that's not going to mean all single detached, and it's not going to mean all apartment buildings. It's going to be a little bit of everything on every scale. It's going to be putting ADUs into backyards and garages and basements, but it's also going to be trying something new, like a tiny home village, maybe in a semi-rural area that has a small-scale septic plant capable of supporting, 50 units or 100 units, but that isn't the size of a municipal system. So those kinds of things of thinking about how do we get the entire spectrum of housing, I think is really important, because whenever you have this conversation on a provincial or national level, everybody's got a new idea that they're really keen on and they want to promote. And typically the way that we do that politically, we tend to focus on one to the exclusion of others. And so I'm really trying to say, okay, how do we get all the players to the table? How do we get everybody doing what they do a little bit better, a little bit bigger, a little bit faster? And how do we get people like you who want to do something that nobody else has done yet, or at least nobody's doing to scale, to the table so that you can bring that solution? And so what I love about your solution is that when we talk about sustainability, accessibility, those are both key issues for housing moving forward. There's no reason why a person with a physical disability should have trouble finding a house that they can live in just because none of them are built for them.
Right.
So we need to have houses that are more accessible, but we also need houses that are more sustainable in terms of environmental sustainability. And typically in a standard house, what a builder will say, a legacy builder will say, is that, those are things that just add cost. So you lose affordability if you make it sustainable or accessible. And the reason they say that is because they start with the assumption of their standard unit, and then they add technologies to make it sustainable, and they add technologies to make it accessible. And so now those are all add-ons.
Right.
But you approach it differently because you're a designer. And so you're starting with design. You're starting with trying to make the most, especially because you're into very small scale design, you have to make the most out of every centimeter of this bunkie. And so you're looking at, how do I make this space sustainable? How do I make the best use of every kilowatt? How do I make every space multifunctional? That kind of stuff. When you start with that level of intense design, you end up with a product that can be actually cheaper and more sustainable at the same time because you've designed it properly. Right. And I don't want to say that a legacy build is not designed well, but that's not they don't require that level of intense design when they're beginning. And as long as sustainability and accessibility is an afterthought rather than built in from the ground level, affordability goes out the window. And what we need, honestly, is affordable, accessible, and sustainable all at once. Right. And I think that's possible, but not without changing something.
Right. Wow. Yeah, that's it's a lot of food for thought, because, and at the same time, when you think through a design problem, it is actually the way you would approach it. You would look at all of those circumstances, and then you would create something tailor-made for that. Now, I know it goes back to that point about affordability and cost. Like, this is only going to add to it. I don't know. I suppose it's just the nature of that legacy process. And there are some innovators in the space, and you hear a lot more about modular building. Modular doesn't necessarily mean, that it's more cost effective. It's just, there's so many different ways to do things. And I was trying to find unique ways to take this process and to actually, build in specific communities and approach each one and pay homage to what each one requires. But that's very difficult, because I'm still just a guy creating a product from an R&D perspective. And that's one of the cool things about chatting with you, because it gets my mind going, and I'm interested to meet these other people in this sort of roundtable like scenario to say, what can everybody do? What are all these different ideas and how we could come up with it. But like, one of the cool ideas that I was showcasing, I haven't really, publicly talked about it, but I think it has merit that you saw, was about the way that this is manufactured and building that first sort of prototype community, if it's like 20 to 50 units, and putting that in a rural setting, and that could be on a specific well, the septic, or what was the name of the concept again? No, desalination, not desalination. It was a type of septic system.
It's a small wastewater treatment plant, small scale wastewater treatment. I forget the exact term,
right.
But the idea is that it's not as big as a municipal wastewater treatment plant, but it's a lot bigger than a septic tank.
Right. That was the main thing that I found, even in some of the first steps I've taken to try to understand what that might look like, because I can conceptualize something like that, which I did for that presentation. Working off that as sort of the one way that we can deal with one of the most important ways to service people, water and sewage. Building a plant in the middle of that property, or that however many acres that is, building all the homes, building as much of the furniture, the millwork, anything in that which is around this central building, and then converting that manufacturing building, which could be one of those prefab steel buildings. I mean, it could be a variety of different things depending on cost and, desire in terms of how far you want to go with the sustainable model or the local versus purchased from abroad model. Obviously, would want to try to do as much as we can locally, and that would be one of the cool things actually about meeting some of these businesses I don't even know exist that I'm sure could build those types of things, but converting that building that we used to build the subdivision into like that community center or the farm. That was sort of the agri-hood concept. So that was when things really started to kind of kick into, and we're like, holy crap, this is interesting, because it is seemingly simple, but that's not being done. Now, agri-hoods is not my word. It is definitely a word I've heard, but there are a few communities or a few I guess innovative developers and builders that are starting to embrace this, because people are wanting to become more resilient, or realizing that the whole concept of community has really been broken down a bit, or we're all migrating even within our own ecosystem, like me coming from the GTA out to here, and people moving around, and it changes the nature of the community. But the most important thing is to meet those people and engage. And I think a community that's not just a subdivision of homes that are packed as densely as possible to maximize that investment for the developer is like quite clearly not the way to be doing this going forward. Like just the way the whole food industry seems to be having the lid popped off of it right now. Not that people didn't know that things are being sprayed, and that it's like, sure. And I know, it's tricky for farm. Won't go down that road too far, but there are a lot of things that we know that we just accept, that we don't challenge. And now that we're hitting the wall in affordability, and our lives really are being threatened, like your firsthand experience with trying people who can't afford housing, like that's our right to some extent, right? That is it. So developing that home and community, and looking at not just what's the new building. And that's one of the things that I shouldn't say is flawed, but is a challenge with this new sort of grant money, is like, how can we build faster and better and cheaper? It's not just about that. It's about like where holistically does that fit in too, right? Mm-hmm. What is that process? So yeah, those are some of the sort of tangents that we went off on, and it was really cool. Yeah, we could probably chat about that forever. Well, just to kind of end on that, it's been great to kind of get that. Like you've easily been able to put through so many of those ideas in such a short amount of time. It's like you've talked about this before. What do you see as some of the biggest challenges that are coming in this coming decade in terms of like implementing some of these ideas, or you think we're going to go too far and there's going to be even more homelessness? Like, what do you think some of the challenges are that we are going to see?
Well, I think you touched on it already when you talked about the mindset. I think it really is about the mindset shift. Because the technologies exist to build homes cheaper, faster, in higher density, all of that. The money exists. The federal and provincial governments are putting out a lot of money. Investors are putting out a lot of money. Even though everything is more expensive these days and the cost of actually getting housing built is astronomical, it's still... The money exists, the technologies exist, and even I mentioned the having all hands on deck in terms of every type of housing, from the small scale to the large scale, from big houses, tiny houses, apartment buildings, everything in between, but then also ownership models. There's not just freehold and condominium, there's also co-op, but there's also land lease and life lease and a lot of different ways. There are a lot of people who are starting to go back into co-ownership, where they're just groups of people moving in together, and they've worked out an ownership model where they each own a bedroom and they share the kitchen and bathrooms. Because they want that companionship in their life, and not everybody wants to be sectioned off into a little suburban house where they don't know their neighbors anymore. Right. I think that the mindset shift of what it means to own a home or to have shelter is what needs to shift, and that's the hardest part. We've got all of the ingredients we need. Mm-hmm. What we need is an appetite for a new dish, something new. Because if we just leave it up to the market, a builder's not going to build something that they don't know if they're going to be able to sell.
Right.
And an investor's not going to invest in something if they don't know it's going to be able to sell. And so they're going to build the thing that they feel the market wants most. And the market is going to buy whatever they build. Mm-hmm. And so it's kind of a chicken and egg situation where, who wants to take the risk to do something new? If we don't build anything new, no one will buy anything new.
Right.
So I'm looking at where can government step in? Where can we change this equation so that there's maybe a different incentive? Because the banks got their incentives, the builders and developers have theirs, the investors have theirs, and ultimately people just need a place to live. And if we're worried about, people won't want to live in an agri-hood or an agriminium idea or something like that, it's a big world out there. And people are moving pretty far distances to find the place that feels right to them. Mm-hmm. I think if we build a little bit of everything, it's all going to fill up. Yeah. It's all going to sell. So let's just keep going on trying new things. I don't think they're going to fail as long as we support them and put people in them. We've got more people who need places to live than we have new builds going on. So let's keep going.
Okay. Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, at its core, based on development and creating new things, the idea here is to scale this up and create new footprints based on input from communities and what is required, and being a part of the solution, not the solution. Mm-hmm. And then leveraging the IP that we've created here to allow people who are less skilled to even build them by nature of how this is designed. So I think that there's something interesting about that, just from my own little piece of this potential puzzle and contributing, because I what we've witnessed and having different people put them together and in different places all across North America, and knowing how the repeatability of the CNC router works, it's a really compelling opportunity, I think. So that's something that I'm going to continue to forge for, and I look forward to chatting more and some of these round tables with you and exposing this a bit more for what I think it has in terms of potential, not the solution, but part of a set of solutions. Absolutely. And I thank you so kindly for coming here today, and for sharing your brain and for being an acquaintance, because I look forward to chatting more about this and doing some good in our community and maybe making a dent beyond. Likewise. Yeah. Thanks so much. Really appreciate it. Yeah.
Real pleasure.
Yeah.